Hello, everyone. My name is Sevin Yeltekin. I'm the Dean of the Simon Business School, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this webinar where I will be moderating a panel of Simon Business School alumni and professionals in the tech and media sector who will be sharing their experience with us and insights with equity, diversity, and inclusion as they specifically pertain to their industry, tech and media. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the Simon YouTube channel. So if you ever want to refer back to it or would like to share it with your network, it's certainly available for you to do so. Equity, diversity, and inclusion has received increased exposure in mainstream awareness and is currently regarded as a matter of considerable importance in the corporate sector. What has unfortunately gone unrecognized is the economic value that exists when EDI is successfully integrated into an organization. More diverse organizations are more effective organizations. This has been confirmed in numerous studies, which have demonstrated a strong positive correlation between measures of EDI and traditional measures of corporate and organizational performance, such as profitability, ROI, and shareholder return. In other words, EDI is an underutilized tool in the corporate toolkit that can be used to boost corporate performance. Maximizing the efficiency and efficacy of EDI is an opportunity for us to create value in our organizations. As many of you are aware, Simon has been recognized as one of the top business schools in the United States, ranked recently number 25 best overall business school by Bloomberg Business Week, which acknowledges our ability to provide a cutting edge and relevant MBA curriculum that develops global managerial talent and teach global engagement strategies based on the foundations of teamwork, collaboration, and innovation. We equip our graduates to recognize and adapt to a changing marketplace and understand best management practices and make decisions in the face of ambiguity. Not coincidentally, Simon has also been ranked as the most diverse MBA program in the US News and World Report. In fact, this is the result of intentional and deliberate efforts that have accrued over 50 years of an evolving strategy advocating for the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion, even before the concept or various acronyms came to be understood as it currently is. Not only were we driven by the moral and social imperative, but Simon's deep understanding of economics, combined with its intensive quantitative focus and evidence-based approaches to decision-making, allowed us to really understand and uncover the patterns and recognize the framework that underlines and justifies EDI as a business case. Our aim as a business school, as any higher learning institution, is to connect the dots between theory, research, and actual business practices. And today we're here to do just that. While almost every major corporation and institution purports to recognize the importance of EDI, not all of them have been very successful in implementing an effective strategy and are therefore unable to realize the full benefits of such initiatives. This is really unfortunate because it can result in the notion that EDI initiatives are not a good utilization of organizational resources, but execution matters. We hope this panel discussion will impart what does and doesn't work in implementing EDI initiatives, the considerations and challenges specific to the tech and media industry, and the outcomes that can be traced back to EDI initiatives. By the end of the session, hopefully you will have the tools, some of the tools, to create a roadmap that will allow you to leverage your own deep familiarity with EDI through your experiences and carry out effective EDI initiatives at your own organizations. We have structured today's session such that we will reserve some time at the end for your questions and answers. So please use the Q&A function to put in your questions, and we will be taking those as they appear on our screen, and I will moderate the conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panelists. We have Juan Jones, MBA 88, Executive Vice President and Global Support Renewal Sales at Oracle. Hello, Juan. Thank you for being here. We have Roshiana Bell, 2016 MBA graduate, Senior Finance Manager at Intel. Hello, Roshiana, and welcome. And we have Sola Ajibade, an MBA candidate 2022, who is at the moment one of our current students. So welcome all, and I will turn the floor to you to give a brief introduction, starting with Juan, and then we'll move on to Roshiana, and then finally to Sola.
Sure. Thank you, Sevin. Delighted to be here with all of you today. I'm Juan Jones. I'm class of 1988. So it's my privilege to have been, ever since my graduation from Simon, in the technology field. I started my career at IBM, went on to Microsoft, and I have been at Oracle for the last 25 years, actually. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you today.
Well, that's amazing, Juan. 25 years, your goals. Once again, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Roshiana. I am proud class of 2016. And, you know, Simon throughout, you could see the growth in Simon and what it means for the industry, what it means for business school. So I'm fortunate and I'm proud. Currently, I'm a senior finance manager at Intel Corporation out here in the Bay Area. I have experience working in banking at JP Morgan. I have experience working in tech also at VMware. Right out of business school, I joined Intel Corporation as a senior finance manager. I'm officially a boomerang, coming back 3 years later, 3 titles higher. So I'm happy to be here and just showing what Simon can really do.
And I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Sola Ajibade. I am currently a second-year MBA student here at Simon Business School. And I also have the opportunity of serving as the current president of the Simon Africa Business Club, which is one of the affinity groups and diversity groups here at Simon. And really excited to share my experience as well. Over the summer, I was at Microsoft as a product marketing manager intern. And before Simon, I was at Deloitte as a consultant, did about 5 years there in audit and assurance consulting, as well as strategy and operations. After that, moved to the US, joined PepsiCo for a little bit as a project manager in R&D, working on digital projects. Got my debut into in the tech space at a CPG company, quite ironic, and then moved on to Simon, and here I am, excited to share my experience so far.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for those introductions. We're delighted to have all 3 of you on our panel today. So I posed a question about, or maybe a statement even, about the fact that, you know, we want to make sure that we understand sort of the economic value that equity, diversity, and inclusion can bring to organizations. So let's start with that question. Does the tech and media industry recognize the tangible economic value proposition that EDI can offer an organization? Where are we? What is the state that we're in right now?
Well, you know, it's a great question. And I would say I'll kick us off, having started in the industry since 1988. I would say today, most definitely. Mm-hmm. And there's several reasons for that. I think first of all, you know, companies are looking for, you know, the best talent. And right now we're in this business cycle, which of course, as all of you know, ebb and flow. Those of you, when you someday get to my age, will see. But today we're in one where there is sort of this fight for labor. And there's this fight for talent, for the best people. And companies have come to recognize that when you create diverse teams, you get thinking around innovation where people come at problems from different points of view, from different upbringings, different cultures, different ways of tackling challenges, etc. And so when you're looking for the best and the brightest, especially today in a global stage, and much the same way that Simon does in terms of the students that we get, as well as the faculty that we get. Mm-hmm. You know, the tech companies, and I'm from the tech industry in particular, at having been at Oracle, we're always looking for the best and brightest, and we're looking for them from a population that's all over the world. And we want a diverse population because we want different points of view to tackle challenges and to drive innovation.
I love that one. I also want to highlight too, you mentioned really the decision-making, there's the aspect of really improving the bottom line from an innovation perspective. One thing we're also starting to recognize, both the intrinsic value and also the performance aspect, is looking at from a cultural perspective really kind of ties into the qualitative side. That is the impact on your culture, right? Having a culture that's inclusive, you bring in a lot of, whether it's the world-class experience, the cultural side from whether it's holidays, et cetera, really bring that awareness to the workforce. And a key part too with really instituting these ED&I efforts and really becoming successful with that is how you help with the retention piece, right? What we're seeing today in this pandemic, quote unquote, is the great resignation, right? You're seeing top talent leaving organizations. Now the question is, you're getting these diverse hires into the pipeline, they're performing, now they're leaving. What can we do to really make sure performance is really retaining those top talents within the organization? And that's both qualitative and the quantitative side too.
I love how you both immediately honed in on the talent acquisition and talent management side, because when we think about sort of, searching high and low for talent and being able to bring that into an organization so that innovation can happen, so that very, perhaps out of the box solution to various problems can happen. There's also the sort of the outward looking, when we think about opportunities, right? When we don't recognize certain markets or don't understand certain markets, or, whether that's on the demographic front of age, whether it's on other global areas, we also miss some opportunities. Can you shed a little bit light on what are some of the opportunities a company can lose by not, beyond talent, by not engaging in a more in a more diverse fashion with the world?
Well, I think you both bring up great points. Roshiana talked about being it not only the fight for talent, but retaining that top talent. How do you keep those people? And it depends on how you as a company or enterprise, or even in the public sector, it really sort of depends on how you behave. What are you doing to drive a culture of inclusion? We spend a lot of time on that because we really want everyone to be treated with respect that we have, and we want everyone to participate and be a part of the company's journey. And that helps us tie people, in our case, closer to Oracle, especially during this as Roshiana mentioned, this great resignation, this period that we're really in. And then I think Dean, to your point, part of what we're having to do as we sort of fight for this, this diverse population and this great talent, is to be able to start to reflect not only the societies that we live in, but for us, from a pragmatic business point of view, the customer base that we have, and we have a much different customer base today and client base. For all you sophisticated consultants in business school, to call them clients instead of my growing up calling them customers. We have this need to reflect a changing set of customers and clients. I'll give you a simple example. When I graduated from Simon and went to New York in 1988 and started selling for the IBM company, all of my CIOs were white males. And you fast forward to today, for example, there is just a plethora of CIOs. They can be white males, they can be white females, they can be African American. I just was on a call earlier today with the CIO of Cummins, major engine manufacturer, who happens to be African American, and our CIO at Oracle is a Korean American woman. So that just sort of shows you, as you look at the sales capabilities that you have, the consultants that you have, however you're deploying into your clients and customers and engaging with them, those clients and customers look different, than they used to. It's a continued evolution. So it's smart business to be able to send out, sales teams and consultants, and the various constituents in your population that sort of reflect the client base that you're working with, let alone in the public sector, where we're seeing more and more requirements to actually do just that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shola. Go ahead.
Go ahead, sure.
Yeah, I can share real quick my own experience as well as a student at Simon, how diverse the class is. As an international student, I'm originally from Nigeria. I have many other colleagues who are also international students, and being in that diverse class helps us to be able to see different perspectives, so different cultures, and bring that to bear in completing projects as well as even in our recruiting experiences. Just being able to share that diverse background and the richness of the cultures that we represent also brings to bear a new and creative way for solving problems. And this is something that I was able to put to use during my time at Microsoft during the summer, and I think it presents a lot of opportunities for organizations who are willing to open up their talent pool to such rich talent to be able to harness this new level of creativity that the diverse talent pool available out there presents.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's wonderful to hear, and absolutely being able to deploy. You know, we did start the panel with sort of talking about a little bit of the frameworks and the tools that, and hopefully our audience can also carry over to their organizations, because for a lot of us, for a lot of organizations, this is, you know, the problem isn't new by far, and there's been many attempts along the way to try to sort of diversify the talent, to be able to be a more inclusive culture, but sometimes these happen in fits and starts. Some have been successful, some have been less than successful, and we would like to learn how to sort of think about it as a framework. What are some particular frameworks that was helpful in understanding how to approach issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or how to develop initiatives in your organization? What frameworks really helped? If we think about building a strategy, go ahead, Roshiana.
I wouldn't necessarily touch on a strategy. I think I'll talk about some of the initiatives that we've taken internally across the organizations that I've worked at, and particularly understanding, in essence, of looking at your pipeline, understanding that within tech, and I know, Juan, you're familiar with this, tech companies starting to really disclose their numbers, their diversity numbers, and understanding, you know, what's our expectation? Where do we plan to hit by? Back then in 2016, by 2020, we would expect 4 to 6% of the market had that representation inside, and really building that one pipeline to get there, and to really assessing what's the success of those candidates. I'll go back to one of my prior employer. One of the opportunities we looked at is, yes, we're getting the diverse candidates into the organization, but they're leaving. And we know it costs more to hire someone and them leave within the first year than for them to stay for X amount of years. So what the organization decided to do is, in essence, create this cohort of individuals and really track their progression through the organization, from how they're performing, their mentorship and sponsors, to performance, understanding, are they being overlooked for promotions? Are they being paid where they're supposed to pay? They started that at the more management level, and since proliferated that to mid-level and junior level. And what they were able to really identify, Sevin, was those biases that are in place. Why X amount of these pockets individual, they're not being promoted even though they've hit the X, Y's, and Z's in regard to get them to that next level. So having that framework, whereas in essence, it's an experiment, but a cohort to really try and really ring fence a lot of the issues. And one of the greatest outcome of that, in essence, was management training, right? Yeah. How do you make sure managers are being equipped beyond just the day-to-day, but the ethical and the social side? Are they equipped to really deal with diverse candidates? And I think that was one of the key learnings, that across all industries, the management skill sets needs to be there, not just executing as to getting products to market and profit sharing, but making sure from a cultural perspective, you are aware of the times that you're in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Roshiana brings up a great point. And it really sort of starts with data, right? This whole, any framework is going to start with actually, if people are your most important asset, as companies have claimed forever to this day, the first thing you need to take a look at to foundationally is, well, what is your team comprised of? Who is it comprised of? Take a look at your leadership team. Do Do you have any females, for example, on your senior leadership team? If you're a global company, is there representation on that senior leadership team? I think to some of the comments that, Sola made earlier, from outside of the US, if you're a US based corporation, and really sort of inventorying your people as your assets to see what they look like. And it's not just an ethnicity thing. It's a lot of times there's the reaction to, oh, diversity. Do I have, Black and brown people in my organization? Well, it's diversity goes way beyond that. What is your Asian population look like? What is your LGBTQ plus population look like? Are those people, do they feel free to bring their entire selves to work so that they can be all that they can be, as the old slogan goes in the US Army, right? And so really you foundationally sort of want to start with, what do we look like? And that's collaboration with your, because that data is obviously sensitive, that's collaboration with your HR teams, et cetera. And then for us, there were sort of two elements. One was the passion that our CEO has for diversity and inclusion, given her own personal story. She happens to have been born abroad, came to the US, had to learn English as her second language, and has gone on to a phenomenal career. And so she's a believer in it. I happen to be, I'm Juan C. Jones, I guess, on the board, which is when my name sort of got US-itized a bit. I'm Juan Carlos. I was born in Spain. My first language is Spanish, from a Spanish mother and American father. And that's how I end up with Juan C. Jones. But it's really, collecting the data, doing that in partnership with HR, looking for commitment from the top would be the second thing. And then the third thing for us, which Roshiana really sort of hit on in terms of how you start to retain people, she used the word cohort. You can create cohorts. We've started with cohorts, and we've moved beyond that to really have these affinity groups, right? We call them ERGs, employee resource groups, where sort of people can opt into participating, in one of those groups, and suddenly, you can get some pretty large scale, groups of folks that are interacting, that really feel sort of a societal connection to the company because the company cares, right? The company helps budget for those affinity groups and ERGs, et cetera. So it's sort of a combination of three things: some data to see what you look like, getting supported by the top is always ideal.
Yes.
And then, looking to drive connection and create a fabric so that people stay. So not just so you're just hitting numbers, but to be able to retain people. Those were three big things that we've seen work well.
Yes,
I'd like to add into one part is policy, right? The part that's being overlooked is the future policies. We know NASDAQ has already instituted, your representation of your board and having women. California just outlawed all white male boards and leadership, right? So getting ahead of that, those policies, really setting yourself up for success, innovate or be left behind. That also reflects your people, right? Your greatest asset. So organizations being privy to these policies, whether it's in the near future or the long term, and already setting yourself up for success. That's adding to that data point, Juan kind of brought up. That's really critical that companies are starting to see that implication. Or if they don't, there's, in essence, lawsuits and et cetera that comes because of the lack thereof.
Yes, and it goes back to the retention and the pipeline within the organization, because if that was started a while ago, so that people are actually retained and had professional opportunities to advance, now you actually have a bigger bench to choose from to these leadership positions, rather than going out there and competing for, talent, because a policy has come down and said, no, this is not the composition of the board that you can, any longer have. And Shola, as somebody who is, you're not at the beginning of your career, but business school provides you another opportunity to dip in maybe heavily into the job market and see the landscape with maybe a fresh set of eyes. As you're looking at different opportunities, as a MBA student, are you evaluating? Are your classmates evaluating companies based on these? Do they have affinity groups? What does the representation look like? Who interviewed me? What are some metrics that you're using on the other side of the market?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Dean Sevin. To be honest, these are one of the major, the culture of the organization, especially around EDI, is one of the things that I and a lot of my colleagues are looking at as we go into recruitment and talking to organizations and recruiters, because that makes you really comfortable and gives you a level of assurance that you're going to grow and flourish within that environment. To a large extent, my decision to go to Microsoft for my summer internship was influenced largely by my last interviewer, who was African-American, and made me feel really comfortable and express a lot of confidence in my ability as an individual, just interviewing with her for the first time. And she went on to become a mentor during my time at Microsoft for the summer. And we had a lot of conversation around my growth opportunities and how to put myself in the best light to move faster in my career if I do eventually choose to go to Microsoft full-time. And these are the kind of initiatives that are organization-led, but also culture-focused, and helps people to, because the culture drives the people to then move ahead to implement these initiatives. And beyond just her, there were also affinity groups at Microsoft, which we were able to join during the summer. We had the Blacks at Microsoft, we have Africans at Microsoft, and I was an active member of both. And we had chat opportunities to have mentorship sessions with folks like Juan, who were at the executive level, and had those chats with them to be able to see what the career upward could look like. And so these are the things that gives us now, who are the receiving end, trying to get into the tech and media space, a lot of comfort as to what kind of organization do we want to join? What is the culture like there? What is the vision of the organization, especially around EDI, not just a gender and race or even sexual orientation, but also for people with disabilities as well, and just being able to include people in every form of diverse population in those plans and strategies plays a significant role in our decision making.
Yeah, I think, Sola, you twice mentioned mentoring and mentorship, and I think that is a key element in terms of all of us in our career sort of paying it forward, as they say, but the connection that you can get from a mentor is just amazingly powerful. And and that mentor can be anyone, right? It's I think one of the I guess, to go back to Sevin, your comment on frameworks, I think it's very important to include all people in this. Always be open to inviting everyone to participate, right? These things cannot be sliced and diced into 1,000 little groups. First of all, you don't take advantage of scale, and then you just have too many groups in small pockets sort of doing their own thing. One of the most important things that I think you need to always remember is, whatever group you have, you should be inviting others to participate. And you'll be, often people will find they're like, oh wow, I didn't know Executive X was going to be here. I wasn't, I'll just pick as an example a sort of a very traditional white male seasoned executive, and he shows up at the meeting and says, I believe in this. I want to be a part of it from whatever perspective. I have 2 daughters, and I want them to have as much opportunity in management as anyone else, as I have had. You find people with all sorts of passion. So it's always very important, even, you know, within an affinity group that you're driving, you'll get others to participate, right? You're always trying to make the tent bigger, and you're not trying to be, you're never trying to create inclusion at the expense of someone else feeling excluded.
Yeah,
right.
that's very important.
I'll particularly say, because I'm by far the oldest person probably in this chat, right, that we don't want, you know, and I would never want my white male colleagues that are 58 years old like I am to feel like they're under attack.
Right.
You know, they're under siege. Oh my goodness, you know, this is because we've seen the kind of response that at least the US can have to some of that, right? The sort of a response that can take place as a result. So you're really trying to create inclusion. You know, you mean everyone. Sure, you're driving some focus. I mean, that's what we're doing with these affinity groups, et cetera. Of course, we're driving focus. It's evident and obvious, and it's clear that's part of the agenda. But you do want to include anyone. And mentoring. I had a mentor when I started my career at IBM. His name was Brian Mahoney. He was not African American. He was, you know, Irish, American of Irish descent. I started my career with him, sort of mentoring me. I went on eventually to join Oracle to work for him because he had moved on to Oracle. So it was a connection to my mentor. He then went off to do the .com thing. It didn't work out for him. And a few years later, I hired him to report to me. And he spent the rest of his year working the rest of his career working in my organization at Oracle. And he was still a mentor to me, even though he was several levels down in my organization, because I was able to learn so much about business from him and all the things, you know, there used to be a book, What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School, something like that from a long time ago, which was sort of all the unofficial stuff that you don't learn, you know, in class. And you can come to realize that having someone as a mentor can be a lifelong relationship. You know, in that particular case, it was for me. But I think mentoring is to go back to Sola's comments, you know, you heard from him, you know, as someone who's young in their career with, you know, lots of runway ahead, lots of gas in the tank, how important that is. And mentoring will help keep those people that you spend so much energy as Roshiana.
For retention.
Sponsors.
Yes, absolutely.
Sponsors too.
Exactly, sponsors and mentoring. But let me go to something that's actually coming up on our Q&A here by one of our participants. And you know, we're looking at a group of panelists who are at big corporations like Oracle and Intel and having had an internship with Microsoft. And maybe, you know, this is one particular perspective, but on the other hand, there are roadblocks. There are, you know, big or small other companies where, you know, you want to make a change as an employee. You're not at the top of the management, and you want to be able to really affect change or get buy-in, you know, and clear some of these roadblocks. Do we have any sort of tips and tools and insights to offer our audience on that front?
Yeah, I'll definitely tackle that one too. You know, Juan kind of touched a little bit on it, is the inclusion piece. It's not, you know, the diverse candidate coming to organization and completely accommodating for them and disenfranchising someone else. It's addressing the fragility in the organization, right? Addressing it head on, not as a consequence, but recognizing that this is a gap that's happening internally and externally, as well as making it a collaborative approach. Oftentimes with affinity groups, we try to solve a lot of the problems within the affinity groups, but we require the buy-in from the Juan and his level and above. So really bringing these individuals that may not always look like us into those forums and us creating these strategies and these initiatives together has been what the success approach. Additive to that is, what I've recognized is senior leaders who do look like us or sexual orientation, et cetera, really telling their stories to their peers to really highlight that this is not just at the junior level, but this is a reality that I've also faced, but I've kept it to myself. So really empowering senior leaders to really tell their stories, to really help influence those relationships that they already have, to bring them on board has been very instrumental too as well.
And I can add real quick that, especially from my experience at Simon, that sometimes just being able to, one of the things I see as roadblocks is the closed-mindedness. So sometimes people feel that EDI issues do not affect them or do not apply to them.
Mhm.
And in sometime in the past, I have been a victim of this mindset as well, and much more open-minded now, much more enlightened now, especially after my time at Simon, because I'm from a background where I was much more privileged back home in Nigeria to start my career early at Deloitte, and so it didn't seem like anything was wrong until you're in an environment where you seem to then experience that difference as somebody from a different background. And so just being able to empathize, right, and understand with empathy what different cultures and different people and different opinions and how those things matter, and then bringing that to some level of general conversation. So build it into the structure of the organization. Like we do at Simon, build it into the orientation process, right? So at Simon, right off the bat, we are taught how it is important to respect other folks' culture. We learn through the Matrix Insight framework how important it is to understand different people and their different leadership styles, and how important it is to be as inclusive as possible in interacting with these folks. So this is something I feel is a good way to surmount this roadblock by building into the structure and the culture of the organization, so that the information is available to everyone. And that way, it can also create light bulb moments for people who do not think that these issues might apply to them.
Yeah, so I'm hearing mentoring. I'm hearing certainly knowing our own data. I'm hearing about sort of tracking to see not only how we bring people into the organization, but making sure that they have the training, the opportunities, the sort of the environment and culture in which that they can flourish, and we can track, for example, their, what is our sort of internal promotion rates, internal retention rates, how does the organization evolve? What other both metrics of progress as well as resources that can be deployed to make a strategy or an initiative around this successful? What other things that companies or organizations track?
Budget.
Or help invest in?
Yeah. On the finance side, right? It's the budget, right? Recruiting is a great example. Typically, each company has their core schools or, their target schools. Allocating budget to go to the non-target schools is a great example. Your historically Black, colleges, etc. On the other side, too, what we also see in Sevin is the systemic side, right? One example that came up in a few meetings looking at the data is how our search engine optimization excludes certain ethnic names, right, out of the pipeline, right? How do we address those kind of behaviors from an ingenuity perspective, where we're not losing candidates because certain metrics they fall short of that are in essence shouldn't be there to begin with, right? So understanding the systemic biases and really eradicating them for one, making sure there's budget to really institute these initiatives for the long haul, right? It may not necessarily immediately affect our bottom line or stock price, etc., but the long-term gain as that mitigates attrition and really increase retention, that's not where that data point can help from the systemic side down to attrition and retention.
I think, Roshiana, you hit on a key point, right? Was again, and this is from the large company perspective, right? You tend to have these go-to schools that you're always recruiting. By definition, not necessarily by definition, but if you do some analysis of the school, they tend to have sort of a target population that they are working with, right? And Roshiana mentioned the HBCUs as an example. I know that's an area that recently for our company, that's been an area where we've gone out to start looking for more engineers, and we traditionally hadn't done that. We had a set of feeder schools, if you will, that were, we're just our rhythm and flow. I mean, it's just what we did. It's, and it's what we did because it's what we had done. So we were sort of always doing it. And then suddenly we're like, wow, let's broaden our reach, and sort of broaden our scope. to try to be able to bring more folks in. And a key point there is budget. I mean, these things, whether it's the Simon School or whether it's Intel or any of these companies, right? You've got to look to commit funding to then be able to commit resource to go try to do that. But if I could just backtrack to one of the questions earlier on, these things are happening at big companies. I think you mentioned in the live chat, someone said, well, what about at a smaller operation? There, my counsel, I guess I'd have to sort of harken back to the days when I started in 1988. And I was the only person, of color where I was out in the entire company, but acutely in the sales offices where I was working. My mentor was, having a mentor, in other words, creating a relationship with someone where you can sort of get outside the box a little bit is important. You can do that. You can have a mentor in a 200 person company. You can have a mentor in a 2,000 person company. So trying to create some of that connective tissue, and then, referrals to opportunities. All of us are people, all of us, no matter who we may be, right? We sort of have the networks that we operate in. Thankfully, those networks are much more modern today, and obviously they're global in their reach. But, use the opportunity to try to influence, the next person that's hired into the company. Provide a referral. I mean, companies, especially now in this, we started in the beginning, this fight for talent, provide a referral of someone, that is very skilled and capable, that may look like you, or that may have your sexual orientation or whatever your sort of thing is, so that you can try to expand your little beachhead where you're not just a quantity of one. I did that at the beginning of my career when I was at IBM and we were in a hiring phase and we were looking for more reps. I said, hey, here's some reps that I know. And, we hired some, we didn't hire others, but we hired some. And then suddenly there's more than one person, you know? And so that would be my recommendation.
That's a very, very actionable item for absolutely to be able to not to just sort of try to manage up and push up, but to actually think about, how can I also increase the ranks of people who come with different points of view and different backgrounds at the hiring stage. And I think that's a very, very good point. Roshiana, I think you had something you wanted to add.
One definitely hit the head on. Some companies, there's financial incentives, right? There's referral bonus. But I think what's really important, the aspect of paying it forward is, I could give you an example. One of the recent companies I worked for, after I gave my resignation, the comment that was made is to a different hiring manager was, we want a carbon copy of Roshiana. And literally, Sevin, the comment I said was, I'm not a unicorn. I know plenty of other Black folks who are just as smart as me and beyond and even more senior. But what I recognized in that moment is, those individuals, it's not meant with harm, it's awareness, right? They don't know where to go and find these individuals. And like Juan mentioned, these people are already in your network. You already know you can vouch for them. My Simon alums are always my first go-to. Anytime there's an opportunity, I'm tapping into that network because I know the caliber of work that we do from an academic perspective and how we've been able to execute on our jobs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very reaffirming to hear. And to going back to Juan's points about sort of being able to reach, and yours too, Roshiana, a bigger talent pool. I mean, one of the silver linings of COVID is that now maybe this sort of, the true and tried method of just going to your feeder schools. Well, now with technology, a lot of companies aren't even coming to campuses. They're just doing a lot of things online through Zoom and through virtual events. And that actually, there is an opportunity in making a big change in the realm of access and opportunity at this point in time. And that needs to be factored in because, these kinds of paradigm shifts really are an opportunity to shake things up and do it differently. Are you seeing that in your organizations? More of those. I mean, you talked about a little bit more about going to HBCUs. Sola, when you go to recruiting events, are you seeing a bigger representation, different representation?
Definitely, and my experience at Simon has proven that the the pandemic has sort of leveled the playing field a little bit more and created more opportunities for many schools, especially Simon as well, to and us as those who are recruiting, to be able to access more opportunities that probably would not have been able to access before now because of the virtual landscape. And so just for example, in the most recent National Black MBA Fair, there's an opportunity to go in person to Chicago, and there was also an opportunity to join the fair virtually, and many students actually took advantage of that virtual option and recruited with so many companies that they probably would not have been able to recruit with if the fair was just in person. And so just having this and more and more of these opportunities are coming up as we progress in this the recruitment cycle as well. We have more fairs going on that are virtual. In fact, many of the MBA fairs this year are all virtual. Practically all of them are virtual, and so it gives you the opportunity to be able to increase your reach and scope as we navigate the recruitment landscape.
Yes, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about, different sort of, initiatives or different elements that would make it successful, from everything from sort of the mentoring, the culture, to the affinity groups, to going and recruiting at different places for leadership to communicate and so on. We also learn a lot from maybe some mistakes or some, rabbit holes that all of us went down to and didn't end up being fruitful. Are there any examples, Roshiana or Juan, that you would like to share with us, where some of these initiatives around EDI or some of these sort of, have taught you something and you've changed direction, or people that you have done in your organization, so that we can learn from it too?
I would definitely say, from doing a lot of research, so one of my prior companies, the reality is, because I was the only Black person in finance, becoming the D&I chair, and really tasked myself with really understanding the data of our tech competitors within the industry. What do their numbers look like? And what's really cool is Microsoft is one of those examples where that intentional funding into their ED&I efforts really showed progress, because the number of their Black representation that were being promoted, compared to historical years, those are points that we were bringing up. Now, taking that promotion element and then going back to our, in essence, our leaders who are really driving this D&I effort, showing here's an opportunity to execute based on understanding the current and Black employees, or POCs, and what's that path to promotion. And the one thing that was very evident was the buy-in was not there. So one of the approach that we actually got and put forth in front of leadership was, how do we drive accountability? And accountability meaning tying managers' performance equity to these D&I efforts. Seemed very radical at first, but what happened in the industry, this is 2016, by the way, what's happened since is many companies and even divisions have started to institute that correlation to manager performance based on D&I efforts. And I think that was the biggest key. Back then it seemed radical, because now you're putting someone's performance at risk. But really time that correlation where you get more buy-in, even though it may not always be organic, you get more buy-in when there's a personal incentive or deficit towards that, in essence, manager.
With that, you also answered one of the questions that was coming in through the chat, exactly how to sort of provide that framework of accountability, right? How do we actually make sure that it's incentivized and infused, and then hopefully we'll come to a steady state where it becomes a part of the fabric of how we do things, rather than, explicit sort of, measurements.
Yeah, and that's fair too, because we also have to recognize that we are in this corporate bubble for X amount of hours, but we individually have different ideology and may have synergies in the culture of the organization. But when your employee leaves their job, those views also start to impede. And I think a great example of that, Sevin, was George Floyd. The way George Floyd rippled through corporate America and really highlighted a lot of gaps and challenges, not just from a ED&I perspective, but how our culture and how we run our business, right? That was where we saw a lot of organizations really do that rapid shift. But is it for the long term, or is it because it's quote unquote trendy at the moment, right? That's something that we're still trying to assess.
Yeah.
I think to your point, and one of the potential pitfalls, right, is you look at the composition of your people, and you just declare, well, let's hire a lot of these folks real quickly, and you don't have what Roshiana talked about. You haven't gone through the thinking of sort of career tracking, mentoring, cohorts, ERGs, promotion abilities. And so you suddenly have this influx of people, and then no sooner with all these great intentions, you have this outflow of people.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, what happened? We were focused on this. I thought we were doing great here. Our numbers, when we reviewed them a year later, they were way up, and now, 24 months go by and then they're way down again. And so I think a key thing to do, that we certainly learned from, isn't just sort of this burst of energy that Roshiana just described because of some catalyst that's out there, right? It's really given serious thought to how are we gonna, diversify and include our population, and then what elements do we have in place to make sure we keep all those folks that we spend all that time and energy sort of, going out to get, and having those frameworks and doing the sorts of tracking, of your data that Roshiana, mentioned, I think are critical to that retention. And then the long-term success, right? Because that's where your promotion capabilities and all that future stuff is going to come from the talent pool that you have, but you gotta keep it.
And in fairness, it's not easy, right? It's a science and an art. There's always the inclusion part, but there's an integration part that it behooves everyone who tries to solve it, right? And I think that's where that level of compassion and empathy comes in, that we know our organizations are trying. Let's have the accountability, but let's making sure that we understand how do we fix this in an appropriate way where it's not, to your point, it's not a fast dash to get the numbers in, because when that leakage happens, it's just as detrimental, or the consequential side where, again, we saw in recent news of what happened at a tech company where there's a lawsuit that someone's awarded millions, right? That's not what we want.
No.
How do we fix that? How are we proactive about making sure these things don't happen?
Yeah, and there's a responsibility also, right? It's not just the company or the firm. There's a responsibility to the individual person.
Yes.
You got to stick around a little bit. I mean, you've got to get promoted, to get to those opportunities. People need to know who you are. I mean, you've got to have some brand equity, some relationship equity within that company. That doesn't happen. That takes a little bit of time. Doesn't have to take the time that I've taken to be in one company, but we also need, our students, our Simon grads also need to realize, some of this stuff, you need to sort of get your legs in that firm. You need to get known. It's not immediately I'm going to join and then, I wait, boom, 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 boom in terms of a promotion ladder, right? I mean, careers are a lattice. You move left, you move right, you advance forward, you stick around, you get known. And it's very important to build some people equity in terms of those relationships, so people know they can turn to you, they know who you are, you're known outside of your department or your function. And I'm going to just say that takes a little patience too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it all ties in with sort of, a lot of the points that you've all touched upon in the sense that, some of these changes and some of these progress, no matter which way we look at it, from whose eyes, takes time, takes a lot of conversation, takes sort of the ability to say this works and this doesn't work, and I need to work on this and I need to deliver, the output, and that's all the way from the top to the bottom and also going laterally. But the scaffolding that I keep hearing Roshiana talk about, right? The scaffolding that needs to be there in an organization to really support the people and support them in a way. And that scaffolding where we put the kind of the weights and where we put the sort of the net has to do with understanding what really is from our own data, what is working, what's not working, where are our shortcomings, where can we actually make both the resource injection as well as other types of injections to make it successful. So I hear all this, but One question that's coming up in the Q&A that came up a little bit earlier was about sort of pay equity, but it's a bigger question than that, if I may paraphrase Jason's question a little bit. Sorry about that, but because I want to have an answer to a larger question that has the pay equity, is that as we talk about this data, as we talk about our progress, including something like pay equity, how much of that do we share with the outside world? What is the sort of the level of transparency that you think is productive to this conversation and pushing all the equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives and work forward? It's sensitive, right?
Well, well, I was just from my experience, you know, it's you started with a key word, right? It is sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
It is also different in different countries and in different cultures. You know, we're obviously a global enterprise. We do, for example, we have a big team in Romania. Everyone knows each other's pay there. It's a young team. We think it's part of it's the culture. So there's just a lot of it's very open. We find that in India, where we have very substantial teams. You know, whenever there's any kind of a pay action, everyone else seems to know everyone else's comp. So that can be different. Mm-hmm. In different countries, different cultures. What we have found, and I think there have been external pressures, I think have been a big catalyst to it, right? We've seen it in the news. What are the traditional, I hate to say traditional, but for lack of a better term, the traditional approach that we've initially seen is, you know, we have a man in a job and we have a woman in a job, and the woman's making some percentage of what the man is making. That's in every boardroom now, every boardroom. I don't know that it's in every startup. I don't know, but I would hope that those younger folks that have been coming along have had more of a focus, for example, on gender equity in that case. So what we're seeing is it's in our boardroom, and it comes down through our executive teams, and we are constantly doing analysis on our people, our teams by leader, and what they look like, and identifying disparities, and then taking remediation to address those, and then ensuring that we're in terms of our recruitment and our hiring, that we're hiring, we do things by bands, right? So that to make sure we're bringing in, you know, men and women sort of, you know, equitably. It doesn't mean it's always equal, depending on the role and the person's skills and everything else, but equitably, sort of by function. So it is, I think you see it everywhere. I don't always say every company, but in the corporate space. And I hope we're seeing it in smaller firms as well, as people are more progressive.
I love how Juan gave the internal answer, which I love, because you get to understand that it's not just, you know, someone in a bubble to say, let me give Roshiana this dollar or this package, right? So, and it's interesting because I just did a Women in Sisters in Sales conference, doing a workshop on compensation and really understanding that total compensation. So yes, in different regions, everyone knows what their salaries, and, you know, in our culturally here in America, you don't talk about that at work. Yeah. They're really breaking down that stigma and really doing your research. Now, taking the other side as someone that's interviewing for a job or an internal, recognizing that I don't know where I fit. One, you need to have a conversation with your hiring manager. It's not a comfortable conversation, but understand every dollar away from retirement times how many years to retirement times your pay period is how much money you're leaving on the table. Now, having that conversation with the hiring manager, get a range and understand what that range is. The commonality of mentors and sponsors keep coming up. Have those conversations with your mentors and sponsors. Does this band make sense? Now let's break that down into salary, and which is your fixed compensation, and then your variable your variable compensation. That is your RSUs, your stocks, versus, you know, whether it's profit sharing, etc. Understand how every company has their compensation structure made up, and you decide if I'm coming a little bit lower, maybe I can really negotiate on the other side. So really doing your own research, your mentors, your sponsors. There's so much data out there, Glassdoor, PayScale, and so much other initiatives where you can go and find out that information and bring that back to that hiring manager, because you are the asset, right? In this environment where talent is needed, you have that negotiating power, but you must know where you fit in the industry. You must know your hierarchy coming into that organization and that pay scale. There's a lot of data. It's not always easy, but that information is out there, and it does couple the fact that internally organizations are looking to do the same. If my company lags the market in pay, how can I make sure that my package is still competitive? And one thing I didn't know at Simon Sevin is, when you go into an organization, it's not just about your base pay, right? It's not just about your RSU. It's the other benefits, right?
Exactly.
A
Exactly.
lot
The
of-
total
yeah.
compensation.
Yes.
It's not just the
So,
baseline salary. Yeah.
Like one of the
Yeah.
commonalities I've learned about individuals, the lifers at Intel, is they stay at Intel because the benefits for women, including freezing your eggs, childcare, et cetera, those far exceed the compensation they would have got maybe a couple $1,000s on their base, right? So
Right.
understanding where you want in your package and take that back to your manager or potential hiring manager.
Which is a great place for especially those of the our either students or participants who are, you know, actively recruiting, or those recruiters who are actively looking for talent, to really understand about the talent management, tying it all back together to the first bit of the conversation we had, that these are the things we need to do to really attract and certainly support and, you know, make sure that we have the right infrastructure for that talent to flourish, and that does both the organization and the people, and as well as our economy, a whole world of good. So I want to thank each and every one of you for this wonderful panel. I could stay here for hours listening to you and talking to you, but we're at the end of our hour. Thank you, Juan, thank you, Roshiana, and thank you, Sola, for taking the time to converse with us today, and we look forward to many more conversations like this.
In here.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.